Morning. Hello. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us. So I'm Heather Tillwine. I'm an assistant professor at Austin Peay State University. I'm also the communications chair for the LGBTQ Health Caucus for APHA. I'm also have a leadership appointment for the APHA Committee on Women's Rights that starts November 9th. I'm also the leader for the special interest group Queer and Transgender Experiences for Quad S, and I serve on the continuing education committee for Quad S as well. I have Casper Voiles, who is the chair-elect for APHA LGBTQ Health Caucus, and they will be our second moderator, assisting us with the chat and helping out with questions as they come in. I'm very excited to introduce our guests to you all today. Our first guest is Curtis Galloway. So Curtis grew up in a small town in Southern Illinois. When he was 16 years old, he was subjected to conversion therapy, an experience he later was able to use to ban conversion therapy in his home state. Curtis went on to be a leading figure in many LGBTQ organizations in the Midwest. Now living in LA, Curtis has taken his activism to the next level and founded the Conversion Therapy Dropout Network to bring survivors of conversion therapy together in community and solidarity. In his free time, Curtis likes to try new food, hike nature trails, explore new places, and enjoy nights in on the couch. Our next panelist is Claire Kilman. Claire is a 27-year-old mediator and community activist who focuses on place-based organizing in Southern Illinois. She moved to the Southern Illinois region nearly a decade ago, fleeing religious persecution after experiencing conversion therapy starting at 14. She's gone on to be politically active in the Southern Illinois region, involving herself in community organizing efforts since 2018, and is currently both serving on the Citizens Advisory Board for a county state's attorney's office and is running for city council in Carbondale, Illinois. She lives in Carbondale with her husband, dog, cat, turtle, 20 fish, and 3 dozen houseplants. So thank you all for coming. I'm very excited for this. Just to start this off, so what got you guys into advocating to end conversion therapy?
Oh gosh. You want to go first, Claire?
I mean, what got us into advocating for the end of conversion therapy? I feel like that question is phrased strangely. Why wouldn't anyone who's experienced what I would consider a legitimized form of torture and child abuse advocate for ending it? I mean, there's no reason not to, from my perspective. Like, why would I? Because I went through a very, horrific, traumatic experience that I feel quite strongly that no one should ever have to go through again.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, when I first started talking about my story, I have a really good friend. Her name's Tara Bell. She was teaching at Rend Lake College. And I was telling her about my experience with what I was going through with like where my parents took me, my therapist. And she's kind of the one that told me about what conversion therapy was because I didn't know what it was. And from there, she had me actually report it to the Southern Poverty Law Center, and it kind of just took off. I didn't really mean to get involved. I didn't really know what what it meant to be a conversion therapy survivor, or even that I had at the time. And so after I did that, it was just like I had all these organizations and people wanting to talk to me about my story and what happened to me. And I kind of just took it, I was a theater kid and was going to school for theater, and so I was, pretty adept at public speaking and doing things, and so it just kind of happened. I kind of just fell into it, and yeah, I kind of just got started that way, and it became my calling after that. It was something that I had been through, and I was able to turn it into something where I could help other people. And kind of like what Claire said, like how could I not do it? I have this power to do it, and so I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna get into advocacy, and I'm going to try and help people and stop this practice.
So, how does conversion therapy impact LGBTQ people as far as relationships, family life, employment?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I mean it can affect basically everything in that. There's some statistics specifically that like the Trevor Project has put out on it. Conversion therapy increases people's risk for depression, suicidal thoughts, drug and alcohol abuse, puts them at higher risk for STIs, a higher risk for homelessness. So it really does affect all of that, especially because obviously, conversion therapy doesn't work. So that affects people's ability to have relationships with their families, to have their support networks. Because one of the things that conversion therapy is really good at is isolating people, and getting them away from people that would support them as themselves. So that leads to all kinds of different things: family rejection, and the loss of your inner circle of people that you previously have trusted. And then that later in life can lead to different issues with creating relationships further on, with trust issues. Sometimes, depending on the types of forms of abuse that people are exposed to in conversion therapy, it can lead to sexual issues later on in life. And so it really can affect a lot of things, just from the sheer fact that the isolation and that it's meant to make you rely on the people that are abusing you.
I can personally attest to a lot of these if you'll allow me to be a little, personally vulnerable. Um, my experience with conversion therapy resulted in a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. My psychologist that I've been seeing now for, nearly a decade, um, would say the complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, I started going to see her after a few suicide attempts and 3 overdoses in a year as a result of trying to manage, and self-medicate the trauma that I had been subjected to. Beyond that, it has always been very difficult to maintain relationships to my family, mostly on their end, because when I wasn't able to conform to their set expectations of a preformed identity, it was ultimately rejected. And, that stings and then filters out into your ability to trust the idea of love in an unconditional way, as though I will always doubt love or be mistrustful of it. Um, and so, it affects every area of my life, even my health to some degree. Um, I personally feel like.
And what do you think is the lasting impact that conversion therapy has had on you?
Good.
Well, i- it's interesting to note that statistically speaking, 80% of all people with so people with post-traumatic stress disorder are 80% more likely to develop lupus, which I have had since I endured conversion therapy. It was about the same amount of time. So like after that, I wound up developing SLE. In 10% of people with lupus, they wind up developing myocarditis, which just this past Monday, a week ago, I was told that I have. I either have like an enlarged left ventricle or some partially collapsed structure in my heart. And so the stress from all of this, not being able to sleep at night, having frequent nightmares throughout the night, anxiety, depression, the years of failed coping attempts, um, all of which sort of culminate in my own failing health, on a personal level. It's a lasting impact for me that still sort of has ripple effects to right now in this present moment I am currently dealing with issues related to, you know, previous trauma.
Yeah, definitely the PTSD. Definitely have that. Something that I didn't really start dealing with until recently, really, in my life, in my in my late 20s. So it's been over 10 years since I've been to conversion therapy, and yeah, I still deal with a lot of um, anxiety and stress from it, and a lot of depression. My doctor recently diagnosed me with major depressive disorder. Whether or not that's tied to my conversion therapy, there's not really a good way to know without a deep dive into, um, the psychology of it all, which I haven't done yet. But I would say that it probably does a lot. I have a lot of anxiety, depression runs in my family, so I'm already already kind of posed to have that. But the conversion therapy on top of it really doesn't help. Um, you know, I, I I would like to think that I'm better than I was, even just 5 years ago with coping with it and dealing with it. And in my personal situation, I was able to kind of get like a saving grace from the lasting effects of family abandonment, because my family, they did do kind of like a 180 and turn around and recognize what they did was wrong. So I think that really helped me, but I still struggle with a lot of, not really resentment towards my family, because that's not healthy for my relationship with them now, but more just this like unconscious reluctance to be openly connected with my parents specifically. Kind of like a, when I'm with them, or if I'm emotional with them, there's kind of like this weird, it's so hard to describe. It's like a like this veil between us, right? Where it's like I'm not truly able to express my emotions to them in an open way. It's difficult for me to do that, and it's difficult for me to do that period with other people as well, and I think that that's a direct response to it. Um, so I have a lot of that. I have a lot of, bad things are going to happen to me. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if, a truck comes through the wall? Stuff like that. As an example, is directly linked to my experience in conversion therapy, and being re-traumatized by the whole pandemic, right? This external force that was, you know, coming at us, right? This external force that you couldn't see, directly mirrored everything that I went through in conversion therapy and was told was this external, the homosexual agenda is going to get you, right? And so dealing with that and those types of things really are things that I'm having to deal with now, as an adult, and going into my 30s, that I didn't have to do earlier. Not sure why that is. Probably because I should have dealt with it before now. But all of these things are things that, I'm in therapy for, and really having to go back and reevaluate, everything that I thought I knew about my mental health, um, that is just now resurfacing.
Now, it was just brought to my attention that we do have a very diverse attendance here. Would you guys be able to define conversion therapy in your own words? And then what kind of are the misperceptions about conversion therapy that's out there?
In my own words, okay. Basically any attempt to change someone's gender identity or sexual orientation. I feel like that's the long and the short of it. It varies a lot in its application. There are statistics that it's mostly performed on minors, and it's mostly done in unlicensed religious settings or religious adjacent settings. But there are adults who willingly seek out conversion therapy practices, or people who get conversion therapy in a more clinical setting, and like it can span a broad range of tactics beyond that. I think people think that it's like anytime they hear the word, if there's a misconception, it's like a camp, right? They think you're being sent away to a Pray the Gay Away camp. But my conversion therapy was just either one-on-one therapy or therapy with my parents present. And that that was how it went down in a dark church basement in the middle of the night, multiple sessions a week. So it's very different than this idea of like, oh, you're going to be around other LGBTQ individuals who are also either seeking out or being put in this situation together, for me specifically.
Mhm. Yeah. So conversion therapy, I mean, from a practical sense of definition, is it like Claire said, any attempt by a licensed professional, religious leader, or someone that has power over someone else to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. And I usually go for that. That's my personal definition, just because that's the one that I use the most. So it's any attempt for someone to say you should be, specifically any attempt to change you to be cis heterosexual. And the misconceptions is like Claire said, a lot of people think of, oh, it's those those pray away the gay camps, or it's a licensed professional that's trying to change their sexuality, or even talk to someone about sexuality, which is a lot of what the opposition uses, to say, oh, let's just talk therapy, and you're trying to ban that, and that's not what we're talking about. Specifically, the misconception that these bans that are in place, including the ones that I worked on, are very inefficient at what they're doing. They're good to have on the books, and they do stand as a kind of a benchmarker for law proceedings and different ethics complaints or anything like that. But the fact of the matter is that a vast majority of conversion therapy cases are people that are being taken to religious leaders, being taken to the church, being taken to guidance counselors that aren't necessarily licensed by the state. And these are people that are, minors, all the way up to people that aren't minors, people that are the age of 18 but are being taken to a conversion therapy or being forced to go to a conversion therapy practice by the people that have power over them, like, 18-year-olds that still live with their family and rely on their family. That was my situation. I relied on my family well into my 20s, just because, I had to, go to school and do things. And I didn't want to not go to school. So if they had wanted to send me to conversion therapy at that point, they could have had that power over me. And that's the case for a lot of people. Um, Conversion therapy is called many things: reparative therapy, sexual orientation, reintegration, reparative therapy, reintegrative therapy. Um, and there's a recent one that they're using. I don't remember exactly. I think it was the reintegrative aversion therapy as well. And it can just be, usually it is branded as just being sexual health issues or sexual issues by the people that are practicing it. Um, but those are the main things that people don't really realize about conversion therapy, is that it's still very much happening. It's still very prevalent. I obviously am, I'm in California, I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm still surrounded by all the conversion therapy practices that were happening 10, 20 years ago. Exodus International, even though they've closed down, they are now, basically rebranded as another church down in Orange County. I work out of an office in Beverly Hills, and there's a conversion therapy practice that's around the corner from my office that I know about. And they're licensed by the state, but they're not practicing on minors, at least that we know of. Joseph Nicolosi is Joseph Nicolosi is known as the father of modern conversion therapy. He's the one that had all the camps, and his son, even though he's passed away, his son is still practicing in Encino, about 20 minutes away from where I am right now. So it's still alive and well. It's still happening everywhere. It's still happening in all the states where it's illegal because there's so many loopholes. Specifically, the religious exemption is a huge problem because then, you can get anybody in there trying to convert these youth or whoever is going and attempting to change their sexuality when in reality it's just child abuse and it's fully legal under the eyes of the law.
I think it's very important also to note that they're not just praying at these camps or at these religious institutions. I mean, people have been used, like beaten with the Bible, physically assaulted, sexually assaulted multiple times by multiple members of the church in order to try to convert them. I mean, it's very horrific, very torturous types of events going on underground. Do you guys know any professional societies or professions that support the use of conversion therapy? Or are we only seeing it done by these rogue individuals in like religious institution basements?
I mean, no major mental health institution is in support of it. So, you're not going to find like the American Counseling Association or anything like that. We do find that a lot of the state counseling associations are also against it. Specifically, like, so my conversion therapy was in Kentucky, and I took out an ethics complaint against my counselor, and the state board found that he was acting unethically, and they reprimanded him and disciplined him for it, which is encouraging to know. But as far as, widespread calling out from like religious organizations, we're not seeing that. That doesn't happen a lot. It's usually just individual churches that'll call it out. As far as the organizations that are doing these things, they are organized. There are rogue, organizations and rogue therapists and, that are doing it, but they're usually pulling from larger organizations. The one that we have out here that is worldwide, it is active in almost every country in the world. It is Desert Stream Living Waters and Journey into Manhood. Those are all organizations that are interconnected with one another. They hold the conferences. Um, when and I can talk about my organization a little bit later, but in doing our events that we do, where we have people log in from all over the world, and it just astounds me every time that they tell me that they went to an organization that I've heard of happening here, and they're, in France, New Zealand, Australia, from all over the place, that they're having these organizations under different names, but they're all interconnected and run by the same group of people. So there is definitely an organizational aspect to it, to where there is some structure and actual like people behind the scenes planning these things and actually doing these things. It's not just, the therapists that are down the street or Joe Schmo in the church basement. There's actual structure and organization to these types of things.
Speaking of, we spoke about how these professional organizations like the APA, AMA, all speak out against conversion therapy, yet it is practiced by licensed professionals. Why do you believe these professionals are still going against what their profession states when it comes to conversion therapy?
I guess the question you're asking is like, why are pseudoscientists pseudoscientists? And I think the answer to that question is the same answer, like, why does a snake oil salesman get money? Because he's really good at selling a hoax, and there are people willing to pay for it. If you can sell the idea that this works, even though, you know, every national health organization in the United States has basically announced that there's no scientific data to support conversion therapy as a practice. That doesn't matter because for people, parents, or adults who either don't want their children to be this way or don't want to be this way themselves, or they feel uncomfortable with it, or downright hostile to it, a way out, even if it's sticking your head in the sand, and not listening to all of the professionals, a way out is just more appealing, more seductive, and so they'll buy right into it. And there's a market for it. That's why. That's why it still exists today as sort of below the surface as it does, where people, may try to just call it sexual health therapy, male talk therapy or whatever. Yeah, it's because there are people willing to pay for it.
The, I mean, there's so many reasons. The main, I mean, well, to be truthful and honest with you, it's religious beliefs. That's what it is, at its core. Because we don't, because where you get transphobia, homophobia, you get it all boils down to the religious aspect of it, which also makes it that much more difficult to get rid of, right? Which is why we're seeing, these religious organizations being exempt from these laws that are going into place because it's religious exemption, and that's what we're fighting. Um, and that's not to say that it's the religion's fault by any means. It's not the religion's fault. It's the fault of the people that are doing it, but it's their misplaced beliefs that are perpetuating it. The idea that men should be one way, women should be one way, and that's it. That's what the Lord intended, essentially. And that's what they're running off of, right? And of course, in realizing when in these conversations when we're talking about this, the people that are doing this see everything in black and white, right? They don't see LGBTQ plus as a spectrum. They don't see that. um but it's those beliefs and the homophobia, the transphobia that we see perpetuated by their misplaced beliefs, these extremists that are going out and trying to prey on people based on what they think should be done from their religion. And that's really what it is. And it's that there are people out there that are willing to support that and willing to allow this to happen in the name of God, or whatever religion that they practice, because it doesn't just happen in Abrahamic Christianity. It happens in other religions as well. Um, but you're very unlikely to see a conversion therapist that is an atheist, or a conversion therapist that practices, a religion that isn't a mainstream religion. Um, so that's really what it boils down to, these notions that are based on these family values of what a man and woman should be, and that's what perpetuates it. It is the unacceptance of anything outside of that norm that they see.
Do you think that new terminology that people are using to define this or call conversion therapy do you think they're creating new terminology to make it more appealing to people, make it sound like more scientific?
Yes, I do. They're doing it for a couple of reasons. They're doing it because they're trying to hide what they're doing, right? So if you're not calling it conversion therapy, you're not calling it reparative therapy, you're calling it reintegrative therapy. Well, that's different. It's not conversion therapy, it's reintegrative therapy, and they'll say that too
Yeah.
in their brochures. They have brochures. And so they're definitely using it to be more appealing. Like, oh, well, we're not doing conversion therapy. All that you're seeing in the movies, and even me, I've had people try to discredit me, being like, well, what he went through is not what we do, right? It's different, right? And it's not. That like Claire said, it's snake oil is what they're selling. So, but yeah, that's absolutely what they're doing.
Isn't it crazy how they've each got their own personal brand of snake oil too? Where it's like,
Mhm.
no two conversion therapists do conversion therapy the same way. They've all got their own, which is how there's no professional standard.
Oh, I think we lost your audio. Oh no.
Claire, no, your audio.
Am I
Yeah.
here? Can
There
you
There
you
hear
you
go.
me?
are.
Nice. There's no professional standardization at all. There's no way in which it makes any sort of sense. If you go to get a bone reset, right? A qualified medical professional is going to have a limited number of techniques, and that anytime you go to a doctor, you're going to get those. But God, some of the crackpot theories these conversion therapists come up with should definitely signal to all of us that this isn't anything that could ever really be applied with you know, some
Yeah.
scientific basis for it.
Right. Well, and then like the whole thing about conversion therapy is people saying that, oh, well, it's worked for this person. Like no
Mm,
other medical or therapeutic practice would be perpetuated if a vast majority of people were harmed by the practice. So like if you think about it, like Claire said, if you're going to get a bone reset and they discover a new way to do it, and 99.9% of people have negative experiences, they're not going to look at that 0.1% and be like, that's what we should be doing right
Yeah.
there. It's like, no, it's crazy. Like we don't those kinds of numbers don't work. If there's something that is deemed to be, and it has been deemed to be overwhelmingly harmful and impact everybody negatively, they're not going to look at the, 1 to 10 people that say it worked for them, even though we know that we have no confirmed cases of it working for anyone. We're not going to look at those when people be like, well, that might be you. You have a 1 in 1,000 chance of it working, but you have, a 999 in 1,000 chance of it not working and ending up with issues for the rest of your life. Like that's just crazy. Like that's not how science works. But as we know, they don't care about the science. They
Yeah.
care about perpetuating their own pseudoscience and trying to force it down our throats. And you know, so
Look how well that worked.
yeah.
So that raises some questions when we talk about religiosity in conversion therapy. So recent data indicates that almost half of adult LGBTQ individuals report religion being a very important aspect to their life. Are there signs that they should watch out for within their own world about what religion is forcing conversion therapy? Like, what are those signs that they need to be aware about?
Um, I mean, it would be pretty obvious if someone in their realm was trying to do conversion therapy or supported it. The number one sign, of course, would just to be a lookout for people that don't support LGBTQ plus people or have like a negative connotation about it. Obviously that doesn't in itself, signal conversion therapy, but if you have someone that is a leader in these circles, a leader in the youth circles, a leader that does, private sessions, specifically like a pastor is what we're looking at here, a pastor what is it, an elder in the church? I don't know I don't know church hierarchies, but you know what I mean, like someone higher up that would meet with people to minister to them. If they're showing signs of not being LGBTQ supportive or accepting, that would be a first indicator. There's not really a good way to know unless you know what they're doing in those sessions. But if you're an LGBTQ plus person and religion is important to you, and you see that the people in your church aren't supportive, you should probably find a different church to go to. Um, there's not really a good way to know unless someone comes forward alleging conversion therapy. But just from a practical standpoint, warning signs, or anyone that would talk about, not, or anyone that's not supportive, or specifically talking about, like some people can change. I mean, there's,
Yeah, I don't think I can even begin to answer the question. I would just abstain. I grew up in a church where, it just wasn't okay, and you were aware of that, and so there were all sorts of pressures placed on you.
Mhm.
While, there are open and affirming churches out there, you would think that any, LGBTQ individual that wasn't afflicted by self-hate would, sorry guys, I'm at work. Any LGBTQ individual that wasn't afflicted by self-hate wouldn't go to a church where they were, where the idea that they were wrong was omnipresent. So, yeah, I don't feel like I'm in a good position to answer that question.
Yeah, it's always difficult, right? It's always difficult to know. It's always difficult, even someone that's not in a religious realm specifically. Because I mean, there are therapists out there that don't purport to be religious leaders, or religious, but still do it. And like I said, I mean, at its core, it is inherently a religious belief that someone has, but um, it's just kind of difficult to know. I mean, if you're yeah, it's just kind of difficult to know. I mean, if you see a youth going in and out of meetings with someone in the church and they seem to be having a lot of issues, and are depressed, and I mean, it's hard to know. It's hard to know what's really going on unless you just straight up ask somebody, which I wouldn't recommend doing because that could be problematic for the person. That's kind of hard to or hard to answer. Yeah.
Well, we do have some questions that people are entering in the chat. One of the questions is, what would you suggest to people that may be experiencing conversion therapy?
Mm. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there. Obviously, my organization, Conversion Therapy Dropout Network, is one. We are a support network. Um, and even though some people may not be able to reach out to us in conversion therapy, just know that we're there. As far as someone actively in it, what you can do, it's kind of difficult on what the situation is, right? If you're dependent on your family and what you're going through, and it's difficult to get out, there are organizations such as, the ACLU or the Southern Poverty Law Center or Born Perfect, and even Trevor Project, that have legal teams that can help. Um, so maybe reach out to them. I will say, for anyone in conversion therapy, don't listen to the dogma, because it's just going to affect you negatively. If conversion therapy doesn't work, you're not going to be the one in however many it might be that purports that it works. Um, yeah, that I get asked that quite often. What would you say to someone in it? There's a lot I want to say, but not a lot that I can say that would be helpful. Um, yeah, I don't know, Claire. What do you?
One of the toughest things about working for the org, which of course everyone should call Conversion Therapy Dropout Network, it is like the best thing that has happened for conversion therapy survivors the world over, because now we have community. And I thoroughly enjoyed my time sitting on the board, but it was very tough, having to read some of what we wound up getting from children actively experiencing conversion therapy or fearful that they were going to be sent to conversion therapy. And what can we do? All I want to do is, jump into my car, drive to wherever they're at, and pick them up and save them. That's like, I want to put on a superhero cape and just make sure that they're going to be okay. But I can't go kidnap children. As much as I want to, I want to go save them, but I can't. What it took for me to be able to survive something like that was the ability to build walls inside of myself that I'm still working on tearing down. I don't know that that is a survival strategy that I would gift anyone because of all of the issues that it's caused me as an adult and that I'm still dealing with. The only thing that after attacking it from every angle for years at this point is that there is a community of people waiting on the other end of this that will help you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's basically the thing is like Claire said, like, there's not much we can do. We do get people reaching out to us saying that they're scared they're going to be sent to conversion therapy or that they're in it. Or even people reaching out trying to tell me that someone's in conversion therapy, and it gets very difficult. Um, it'd be one thing if it was as an adult, because then I can reach out to an adult and et cetera, et cetera. But when it's children, there are we live in a land of laws. And sometimes those laws don't work the way that they're supposed to. I can't just reach out to them. They can reach out to us, but, we have to be careful in what we do so that we don't put them in danger and we don't get ourselves in legal trouble as well. So it gets so, so, so difficult to tackle those things. And what do you tell someone that's going through abuse? What do you say to them? And I guess for me, I mean, kind of like what Claire said, for me, what would I say to myself? And basically, like, you're going to be okay. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. Probably going to be the worst thing that you've gone through. Obviously, I don't tell this to them, but, that's what I want to. And that yeah, that's always a hard question because there's just not much you can say. We don't have any sort of recourse for it.
I think, like you mentioned earlier, it's very much about isolating individuals, right? During this conversion therapy. I mean, they get pulled out of school, they're isolated from their friends, they don't have a cell phone to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And during my research, a lot of my participants said, I just conformed. I just said what they wanted to hear, so it would stop, which is very heartbreaking to hear. We do have a question that says, I'm in a research role. What research is needed to advance advocacy efforts? Any specific topics or new issues for which quantitative evidence would be meaningful in your advocacy work?
Yes. Um, yeah, so I mean, we always need more metrics on everything to do with conversion therapy. We have an understanding of how many we think have gone through it. And it's probably in the millions at this point, and how many people are currently in it, which is in the tens, hundreds of thousands. Um, we just need more metrics on everything, including the intersections of race, gender identity, sexual orientation, um, all of that. We don't have any of that information. A lot of the time, conversion therapy is portrayed as a cis white, gay male issue. It's not. We just don't have the the data to back it up, really. Um, because and it kind of falls into that same situation that we were just talking about, that how do you get this information out of people that are specifically being kind of hidden from the world, right? um so we need all that information, all of that would really help to understand the depth and where it's happening, who it's impacting, how it's impacting them. And that's not just the US, right? We need global information, which is a whole different beast to handle because we don't have that. I do know that there are, like Australia is doing some really good research on conversion therapy. New Zealand's doing it. England is doing a lot of research on it. But we need all of that information to really understand who we're dealing with here and who is being targeted the most for this, um, and just get a better grasp on what's happening and what's being done to these people, what's being said to them, from a clinical standpoint, just so that we can better serve them on the other end, so that actual therapists can know, like, okay, well, here's what happened to you, and here's how we're going to help you deal with that. And we just don't have it. We just don't have that information, really.
And the Trevor Project's done a lot of really good
Hmm.
work compiling a lot of data on health outcomes for people who've undergone, conversion therapy practices of various degrees. A lot of that focuses on mental health and, suicidality and the rate at which people who experience conversion therapy are at a higher risk for risk-taking behaviors like sex and drug abuse or committing suicide. Beyond that, I would love to see, especially this is just very selfish and personal, but to the public, health professionals in the webinar, I would be very interested to see long-term health outcomes on a physiological level for people who experience conversion therapy as opposed to just the general population. Or even, like what is an LGBTQ person's health outcome who hasn't experienced conversion therapy like, when sort of set down next to someone who has.
Yeah.
I'll say as someone that does research this topic, it's very hard to get data on this because it's so underground, so stigmatized. I mean,
Mhm.
it's really hard to get people to come out and say that they've went through this process. But it's definitely necessary to do, necessary work, of course. We do have another question that says, with the proliferation of conspiracy theories such as Q, are you seeing a growth in the use of conversion therapy?
We don't know.
Yeah, so everything's gone underground, like so underground, right? In the 20th century, you had people, getting lobotomies for this. I mean, that was a part of this for trans people up until like the early 80s. There were some parts of this country where if I wound up telling a professional or the wrong person that I was transgender and I was seeking out help for that, they might issue a lobotomy as a treatment.
Hmm.
Um, there's been a wave of LGBTQ acceptance and human rights pushes in the United States and abroad that have definitely submerged a lot of these practices. They haven't gone away so much as they've just been able to obfuscate their language, as Curtis and I have alluded to previously. And that makes them even more difficult to track.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know, right? Because it's so hard to even get information on them. Um, I would probably, I would guess that it's probably been proliferated from the recent resurgence in, like far right conspiracies and religious extremism. I would say it's probably seen a resurgence of it, but we just don't know. And we're not going to know until those people get out of it, until those youth or whoever is in it is on the other side. We're just not going to know for a bit, which is awful. But I mean, there's nothing we can do, right? Because we just don't know. We don't know. I will say it's very encouraging to see. I don't know if anyone has seen this, but President Biden back in August or September, I think it was August, put out an executive order, and part of that was about conversion therapy, ordering the Secretary of Health and Human Services to investigate conversion therapy, and to compile a report about it, and to have the insurance bureau investigate if they were covering any conversion therapy practices with insurance, and that they would terminate those payments for that. So that is very encouraging to see that, and we're seeing that in other places in the world as well. So we're definitely seeing more of a reaction to try and stop it from government, which we haven't seen before in the past outside of the state bans. Now we're seeing it on a federal level, which is very, very encouraging. Um, but with anything like that, obviously, with how polarized things are on a federal level of government, um, we'll see people pushing back against that. Whether that results in more people getting put into conversion therapy, I don't know, and we're not going to know. Um, it would take like FBI level of investigation to really know, and obviously nobody has the resources or funding to do so outside of the government like that. Um, yeah, we just don't have a good answer for that one.
We do have another question that says, does Conversion Therapy Dropout Network offer support group for survivors?
Yes, yes, we do. Specifically, we have our Survivor Sunday. It is the last Sunday of every month, except for no, October and December. I think I kept November the same, just because the holidays that fall at the very end. So we have it the last Sunday of every month, except those two. And it is at 1 p.m. Pacific time, runs for about an hour and a half, and it is online. So everyone can access it. You can go to our website, conversiontherapydropout.org, or you can go to our Instagram, Facebook. We have a TikTok, basically every major social media, Twitter, and you can find it there and register for that. We've got one coming up next weekend, and it's a support group for conversion therapy survivors. And then we also do like education as well, and we've got that coming up next Friday. We've got like a talk back with an author who um, didn't necessarily go through conversion therapy. Well, no, he did. He went to a camp for a bit, but was a religious leader and is going to talk about his whole process of going through all of that. So,
No, Conversion Therapy Dropout Network does some of the best work, in the country and internationally on connecting and linking up survivors. Really appreciate
yeah.
everything that Curtis and the org does for us because we are able to have community at regularly scheduled and held events.
Yes. Yeah.
And Conversion Therapy Network has a website. They also have a Facebook page that lists when all these meetings occur. So you can keep up to date and keep with that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We also do like one-on-one meetings too. So if you're not comfortable meeting in a big group, first off, you can just schedule a time with me and we can chat about your story and, get a little bit more comfortable that way. Because it can be really hard to talk about these things sometimes. So we do offer that as well.
Yeah.
Now, we had an audience member that suggests that there is preliminary data out there that outlines a broad array of practices used and the impacts of health, and that they would be happy to provide that data too.
Yeah, please do.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of data, so how do you feel that public and professional organizations can help advocate for changes to be made to end conversion therapy?
Well, I think the big thing is just public knowledge about it, right? Getting involved in organizations that fight against it, whether that's, my organization or Trevor Project, Born Perfect, and the NCLR, they do really good work on that, and they're very, very involved. So if you want to get involved in direct activism and actually doing lobbying efforts, go to them. They're doing a lot of good work. But a lot of it public education, because like we talked about, people have this misconception that conversion therapy isn't happening anymore, and that conversion therapy is not as prevalent as it was, and that's just not true. So
I
education
get that a
of what it
lot.
is. Yeah,
Man,
I
I
do
get like
too.
I say, oh yeah, I went through conversion. That still happens? We still
Yes,
do that?
yes,
Yes, we still do that, unfortunately. It's terrible, and it's happening to children right now.
yes.
Makes me want to claw my ears off whenever someone says something like that. But yeah,
Yeah. So that's the big thing, doing that, and then of course, helping survivors, getting involved directly. If you're a therapist or you're a some sort of mental health provider, you have one of the most coveted skills for conversion therapy survivors that we get asked a lot for is, do you know anyone that can help with what I've gone through and the issues? And with any sort of medical thing in the United States, it's outrageously difficult to find mental health support for a lot of people. So if you're able to help out in that way, that would be fantastic. Whether that's, volunteering your services, or specifically holding open spaces for conversion therapy survivors, and working with people on payments, stuff like that. Anything helps, because a lot of people that are coming out of conversion therapy that are or have been dealing with it, just now talking about it. Some people go years without ever talking about it after it happened. They desperately are looking for someone with professional licensure and training, which is not me. I'm not a therapist, to help them and talk to them in a medical sense.
All right. So as we wrap up, I'm wondering, what message would you like to leave public health professionals with?
Hmm. Definitely be on the lookout for it. From a standpoint, especially like down, I mean, even in small communities, right? It can happen anywhere. I mean, like I said, people have this conception of like Southern California, Los Angeles, um, being the safe haven in this very progressive state, in this very progressive area. Um, Specifically, you think of San Francisco and you think of, Los Angeles as being these places where this won't happen. But the fact of the matter is it is happening. It is happening, and we know it's happening. So that means it's happening absolutely everywhere else too.
Yeah.
And we know it is happening other places. So be on the lookout for it, for people that are in a position to actually do something about it and actually make reports and actually get these people, get their licensures revoked, get, legal action taken against them, because at the end of the day, conversion therapy is a form of torture and abuse. It is. It just plainly is. Be on the lookout for it. You'll see places that offer youth counseling for sexual issues, or they like to use the term men's issues a lot. We do see them targeting men a lot in their marketing materials. And like I said, they see it as black and white, right? They don't see a spectrum of LGBTQ intersection. Um, so that reflects in their messaging. But that's the biggest thing. Just be on the lookout for it. Um, it's difficult to tell, but there's usually telltale signs on their messaging, on what's going on, what they talk about, and the messaging they use in any sort of like LGBTQ plus support. If they don't support it and they're using things like men's issues or sexual issue counseling, that those are really big red flags.
Yeah, just to echo what Curtis said, if you see something, say something, report, 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 um, speak out against it in your field, you
Mm-hmm.
know, um, do the scientific legwork to ensure that it is run into the ground as, as
Mm-hmm.
deeply as you can possibly bury it. But,
Yeah.
it'll always be there. It's just rooting it out.
Yeah. The biggest thing is treating it like it is abuse, specifically for children. When it's an adult, there's less you can do, kind of. But if it's treat it like it is child abuse and report it as such, because it is. And mental health organizations back up that science that it's overwhelmingly harmful. So, as someone in that field that has, or in the health field that has the capability to report those types of things and give their expert opinions of it and expert, testimony on what they've seen, you have a unique ability to help stop it in that regard. And that also goes for education as well, like teachers.
It's so interesting that they market it, but they try to cover up their marketing so they don't truly come out and say that this is conversion therapy or reparative therapy. I mean, if you were thinking that it worked or something you were proud of, you think you'd be very out and open about it. So it's very interesting. What do you guys think the next steps for us to take to prevent this continued practice?
Well, like I said, education, lots of education, because the more people know about it, the harder it becomes to hide in the shadows. Specifically, education for parents that would send their children to conversion therapy. Um, One of my board members, Katie, she talks about this a lot, is that she wasn't going to send her children, or not her children, but her child, to conversion therapy, but she was pressured to do so. And so, thankfully for her, she had enough education and knowledge about conversion therapy and about supporting LGBTQ plus youth to know that that wasn't something that she should do. But a lot of parents don't. I fully believe that if my parents knew what they knew now, they would not have put me in conversion therapy. You know, they just didn't have that knowledge. They were going off the knowledge of someone that they thought was a professional that knew what he was talking about and that was, acting in the best professional sense. Um, that obviously wasn't the case, right? So education is really the biggest key in this, is really getting the information out there about what it is to these parents. If you're a teacher, you have a fantastic opportunity to disseminate information about it. Specifically, now that we're teaching LGBTQ history in schools, this can be a huge aspect of that. Teaching about what conversion therapy is, why it doesn't work, what the dangers are, that can really, really, really help a lot. And the more we educate about it, specifically people, especially the youth, right? Because it's just going to perpetuate, right? After, as we've seen, like I said, Joseph Nicolosi, his son has taken up the mantle for the guy, after his death, so really educating people about what's going on and, why it should not be acceptable to do this to people.
I would challenge all the professionals in the room to help conversion therapy survivors work on language around this, because oftentimes there's this linguistic dance that is reactionary when we seek out a ban on conversion therapy and we use certain language, right, around, not making any attempt to change an individual's gender identity or sexual orientation, that they will then flip around and call giving affirming care to trans youth or affirming care to an LGBTQ child in general, as conversion therapy in its own right, which is as twisted as it gets. But they will really try to spin it rhetorically that way. So working on developing the language around it so that it's as airtight as possible when professionals bring issues up and can't be spun back around by a reactionary
Mhm.
force.
Yeah, that is a big issue, that we see, in my work with working in the legislature for it. We did see that a lot where people were saying like, well, how can we can't talk about sexuality, how are we going to help people? It's like there's a very big difference between talking with youth about their sexuality and gender identity and what they're feeling and talking them through it and asking questions than telling them that they're going to change them to be, cis heterosexual. There's a very big difference there. So that is a big issue, that we run into a lot. You can give, affirming care, but affirming care is not trying to change someone's identity or orientation. So,
Yeah, I know a lot of radical feminists, which I am one, but transgender exclusionary radical feminists who will, take the idea of a a child, which all children have conceptions of their sexuality and their orientations and their gender identities that develop over time in age appropriate ways, right? But when you're a teenager, you know who you are. And so, when that child expresses that they know who they are and they seek out affirming care, these individuals see it as an attack on what would otherwise in their minds be conceived of as a gay man or a lesbian woman, and that we are sort of robbing that from them and enacting a conversion therapy in our own right, which is a conversion therapy survivor who is also transgender and was put through the ringer in conversion therapy for not having a standard gender identity. It's not only frustrating, but I feel like winds up setting a bunch of weird boundaries linguistically that I wish I could just bulldoze.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is there anything else that you all would like to add to the conversation?
Oh, I don't know. We've talked about almost everything. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, if you want to get involved with my organization, you can reach out to me directly. You can send us an email. We're always looking for volunteers to help us out. We are a small grassroots organization that started right before COVID. So we need all the help we can get. That is a good way to get involved directly with survivors. And then, like I said, for any mental health professionals, using your ability to help people with, you know, their mental health, because that is a big thing. I mean, even for me, I've struggled a lot with my mental health, even recently, and struggling to find care that was, that suited me. Um, and of course, any teachers and educators, that's great. Religious leaders, if there's any here, um, we really need more support from religious leaders to call out this practice. I don't feel that it's happening enough. Um, and it is setting a bad precedent for survivors. A lot of people have a lot of disdain for any religious organizations, and I think that we can start to really change the conception around that because there are a lot of LGBTQ plus affirming churches, and that is perfectly fine and fantastic, but we're not seeing a lot of active support from that end on our efforts, and we need more of that. And that's really all I've got.
All right. Well, thank you both for participating in this webinar and all of you that are watching. This has been very informative for us. This webinar was recorded and will be posted on our LGBTQ Health Caucus website. We thank our panelists again, especially for being willing to share these experiences with all of us. We hope to see you all again in the future event, and thank you guys so much for being here.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for having us.